My name is Elena Marsh, and for 22 years I mopped the same stretch of linoleum between the cafeteria and the west stairwell at Coldwater Elementary without ever once unlocking the door at the bottom of that stairwell. I want that on the record before anything else, because whatever I did after the door opened belongs to a different woman, and I need you to know the first one existed. The outbreak reached Coldwater, Missouri on a Tuesday in late October, which I only mention because Tuesday was Chicken Patty Day, and I had already scrubbed the steam trays by the time the first scream came through the intercom. I was 47 years old. I had buried one husband, raised no children of my own, and memorized the service tunnels of that building the way other women memorized recipes. I knew which radiator in Mrs. Aguilar's third-grade room knocked on cold mornings. I knew the locker that refused to latch unless you kicked it low on the left. I knew every door in that school except the one that had been welded shut in 2004, 3 years before I was hired. And that door I only knew by the rumor stapled to it. The rumor, if you grew up in Coldwater, went like this. A boy had died down there. Not during a school day, not during anyone's shift. Just a boy in the basement, in a year nobody agreed on. And afterward, the district had welded the door and poured concrete behind it and built a new boiler room on the east side, so no one would ever have to walk that corridor again. Principal Hendry told me on my first day that the welded door was structural now, and I should treat it like a wall. I did. For 22 years I mopped past it and never once let my eyes rest on the seam. On Tuesday at 10:47 a.m., the intercom cut out mid-announcement, and Marcy Dell, who had been the school secretary since before I started, came over the hallway speakers with a voice I had never heard her use. She said, "Lockdown." She said it twice. Then she said, "Elena, if you can hear me, the front office doors won't hold, and I need you to bring your keys." I was already moving. A janitor's keys in a lockdown are not ornamental. I had the master for every classroom, every supply closet, every exterior door, and the override for the gym partition. I came up the west stairwell 2 steps at a time with my ring jangling against my hip, and when I reached the second-floor landing, I heard the first one. Not a scream. A wet, stuttering cough from somewhere in the parking lot, answered by another from the bus loop, answered by a third from inside the building. They were already in. They had come in with the parents dropping off forgotten lunch boxes. They had come in through the propped side door by the music room that Mr. Keene always propped because he smoked between periods and thought no one knew. I reached the main office, and Marcy was holding the door shut with her shoulder, while a man I recognized as Tyler Brennan's father pressed his face against the glass from the other side. His mouth was open too wide. His eyes had gone the color of wet paper. Marcy looked at me and said, "The kids are in their rooms. They did the drill. They did it right. But Elena, the front doors are going to go." I told her to get to the nurse's station and lock herself in. I told her I was going to move the children to the basement. She stared at me. She said, "Elena, the basement is welded." I said, "I know. I have been listening to it my whole career. It is not welded anymore. It opened this morning on its own, and I felt it in the floor when I was mopping. And I did not tell anyone, because I thought I was losing my mind." Her shoulder slipped on the door. I ran. I had felt it at 6:12 a.m., the way you feel a refrigerator stop humming in a house you thought was silent. A pressure that had been part of the building my entire career had adjusted itself by 1 notch, and my feet knew before my head did. I had been mopping the corridor outside the gym, and the mop handle had leaned just barely toward the west stairwell, as though the floor had tilted 1/4 of an inch toward a drain that shouldn't exist. I had straightened the mop. I had finished the corridor. I had told no one, because who do you tell that a building has exhaled? Now, running past the trophy case with Marcy's voice still in my ear, I understood I'd been given 6 hours of warning and had spent them polishing baseboards. The hallway was already wrong. Amber Pritchard, the 4th grade teacher whose classroom I passed first, had her door cracked open and was waving me in with the flat, urgent economy of a woman who had practiced this drill every September and had never, not once, believed she would use it. Behind her, 23 9-year-olds sat cross-legged under their desks with their hands over their mouths. One of them was crying without making any sound, which is a skill no child should have to learn. Amber whispered, "The front office." I whispered, "Gone in 2 minutes, maybe less." She said, "Where?" I said, "The basement." Her eyes did the thing adult eyes do in cold water when you say that word. A small private flinch passed down through the town like a recessive gene. But Amber was 29 and practical and had a student named Devin Ruiz with a peanut allergy and an EpiPen in her desk drawer. And she did not have time for folklore. She nodded once and started getting children onto their feet in a line, smallest in front, the way she had rehearsed. I moved down the hall to the next classroom. Mr. Keene, the music teacher who propped doors, met me in his doorway with his face the color of old milk. He already knew. He said, "Elena, I am so sorry. I am so sorry." I left it open again, and I stopped him with my hand flat on his chest because there was no time for his confession and because I did not want to be the priest of it. I said, "5th graders, stairwell. Now, quiet as the Christmas pageant." He nodded and turned back into his room. Room by room I went. Mrs. Aguilar, 3rd grade, already had her kids in 2 lines and a bin of library books tucked under her arm, for reasons I understood later. The kindergarten wing was the hardest because kindergartners do not whisper and do not walk in lines. And their teacher, a substitute named Hollis, whose last name I never learned, was trembling so hard she could not turn her key in the lock of the cubby room where 2 of her children were hiding. I turned it for her. I lifted a boy named Jacob out of a coat bin and set him on his feet and told him we were going to play the quiet game, and the prize was a juice box. And he put his small sticky hand in mine and did not let go for the next 6 hours. We had 143 children in the building that day. I counted them as we moved, the way a shepherd counts in the dark, by touch and by voice, and by the absence of sound where a sound should be. We lost 2 before we reached the stairwell. I'm going to tell you about them later, because I owe them that much, and I will not pretend I did not see where they went. At the top of the west stairwell, the line bunched up behind me and waited. And I looked down the steps toward the door I had not touched in 22 years. It was ajar, maybe 4 inches. From the gap came a draft that smelled like wet stone and something sweeter underneath, like a pantry that had been closed a long time with fruit still in it. Behind me, a child asked, "Miss Elena, is it safe?" I said yes. That was my first lie. The stairwell was narrow, and the children came down it in a slow, bright river. And at the bottom I stood with my hand on the door and did not push it open yet. Amber was behind me with the 4th graders, then Mrs. Aguilar, then Mr. Keene shepherding his 5th graders with a hand on each shoulder as if he could physically apologize them to safety. Hollis, the substitute, was somewhere in the middle with her kindergartners. And 2 6th grade teachers I did not know well, Ms. Patel and a man named Briggs, were bringing up the rear with the oldest students. Marcy Dell had refused the nurse's station. She had come down behind us with a red emergency binder clutched to her chest and the fire extinguisher key on a lanyard around her neck. And I had never in my life been so grateful for a 63-year-old woman with a binder. I counted 141 children on the stairs. I had counted 143 upstairs. I did not say this out loud. I filed it the way you file a bill you cannot pay yet. Jacob's hand was still in mine. I crouched down to his level and asked him to wait on the second-to-last step with Miss Amber for 1 minute while I checked the room. And he nodded with the seriousness of a very small soldier. Then I pushed the basement door open with my shoulder. The smell came first. Not rot, which was what I had braced for. Something older and drier, like the pages of a book left in a trunk. The basement was one long, low-ceilinged room the length of the cafeteria above it, with exposed pipes and a cement floor and a string of caged bulbs that were, impossibly, already on. Someone had lit them. Not recently. They had the yellow, steady burn of bulbs that had never been turned off, which is not how bulbs behave. At the far end of the room, against the north wall, a boy was sitting on a wooden crate. He was maybe 10 years old. He was wearing a striped shirt and corduroy pants in a cut I had last seen in photographs from my own childhood. His hair was cut the way my brother's had been cut in 1986. He was not a ghost. He was solid. He had dirt on one knee. He looked up at me when I opened the door, and he smiled. And the smile was the smile of a child who has been waiting a long time and is relieved the guest has finally arrived. He said, "Miss Elena, you came." I had never seen him before in my life. I said, "Who are you?" He said, "I'm Thomas. You taught me to read." I had never taught anyone to read. I was a custodian. I mopped floors. I emptied trash cans. I had once sat with a first grader named Thomas Beale in the hallway outside the nurse's office in 2009 and helped him sound out the word hospital on a pamphlet because he was scared and needed something to do with his mouth. And I had forgotten it until this moment. And Thomas Beale had moved to Joplin in 3rd grade and would now be a grown man of 27. The boy on the crate was not 27. He said, "You can bring them in, but not all of them." I said, "How many?" He said, "The room holds 120. Behind me in the stairwell, 141 children and 7 adults were waiting for me to tell them it was safe. I could hear Jacob breathing. I could hear, from somewhere upstairs, the front office doors finally giving. A flat wooden crack followed by glass, followed by the wet coughing of things that had been people 90 minutes ago coming into the building, my keys no longer protected. I looked at the boy on the crate. I said, "How do I choose?" He said, "You already know how. You have been choosing your whole life. You just called it cleaning." I closed the door behind me and stood in the stairwell with my back against it. And I looked up into the faces of 7 adults and 141 children. And I made the first decision of the new Elena. I said, "The basement holds 120. I am going to send the youngest down first. Kindergarten, first, second, then third. Then we stop and we think." Amber said, "Elena, what?" I said, "There is not room. There is physically not room. I measured it wrong in my head. I am sorry. I had not measured it at all. I was lying to the only woman in the building who might have understood the truth, because the truth required me to explain a boy on a crate who had been dead or not dead for 20 years, and I did not have the minutes." Amber looked at me a long time. She was not stupid. She had heard the rumor. She had grown up in cold water. She closed her mouth and she started moving the kindergartners forward, and Hollis went down first with her 18 5-year-olds. Jacob would not let go of my hand, so I went with them to the threshold. And at the door, I knelt and pried his fingers loose one by one and told him the juice box was waiting on the other side. He went. Hollis went. Mrs. Aguilar followed with her 3rd graders because she understood, without being told, that her job was now to be the adult in the room below. Mr. Keene went with her. carrying a first grader whose legs had given out. Ms. Patel stayed with me at the top. We got 119 children through the door. The 120th was a second grader named Lila Corbin, who had a cast on her left arm from a fall off the monkey bars in September. And as she reached the doorway, the boy Thomas appeared in the frame and put his palm flat against the wood and said gently, "That's enough." The door closed. It did not slam. It closed the way a parent closes a nursery door at night, with care, with finality. On my side of the door stood Lila Corbin, 22 5th and 6th graders, Amber Pritchard, Ms. Patel, Mr. Briggs, Marcy Dell, and me. 28 of us. And above us, through the stairwell, the sound of the school being entered room by room. Lila said, "Miss Elena, I want to go in." I said, "I know, baby." Briggs, the 6th grade teacher I did not know well, said, "What the hell just happened? What do you mean the room holds 120? And his voice was climbing toward a register I could not afford in that stairwell. Amber put her hand on his arm. She said, "Not now." She said, "Elena, what do we do?" I looked at the 22 older children, 11 and 12 years old enough to run, old enough to understand, later, what had happened in that stairwell, and to hate me for it, which I accepted in advance as the price of them being alive, to hate me. I said, we go up. We go up and we go out the loading dock behind the kitchen. We go across the field to the equipment shed. We wait there. Amber said, "The loading dock is past the cafeteria." I said, "I know." She said, "The cafeteria is where they came in." I said, "I know." Marcy Dell, 63 years old, clutched her red binder and said, "I have the keys to the shed. I have the keys to the diesel pump. I have the keys to the bus." I could have kissed her. We went up the stairwell in a line, the older children between the adults, Lila Corbin's small casted arm tucked under my free hand. At the top I paused and listened and heard, somewhere in the building, a child laughing, which is the sound I will carry with me until whatever kills me, because no child in that building should have been laughing. And the laugh was coming from the direction of the basement door. I did not turn around. I counted 28, and I pushed forward into the hall. The corridor above the stairwell had changed in the 12 minutes we had been below it. The fluorescent lights were still on, which was a mercy and a cruelty both, because they showed me Mr. Keene's lanyard on the floor outside the music room with the keys still attached. And they showed me a smear along the lower wall where something had been dragged. And they showed me that the door to the main office was standing open with the glass panel gone and the frame beaded dark along the bottom edge. The air smelled like copper and like the cafeteria's industrial cleaner, which I had refilled that morning and which had apparently been knocked over somewhere out of sight. I held up my hand. The line stopped behind me. Amber moved up to my shoulder without being asked. I had known Amber 4 years, and I had never been in anything with her harder than a parent-teacher night. And in that hallway, she became, silently and without ceremony, my second. She did not ask permission. She did not look to Briggs, who was older and a man and technically a department head. She looked at me because I had the keys. And in a building under siege, the keys were the office. I whispered, "We go left, past the art room, through the teacher's lounge, down the back stairs to the kitchen. The loading dock is off the kitchen." She whispered, "The teacher's lounge has a door that sticks." I whispered, "I fixed it last month." She almost smiled. It was the closest thing to a human moment I would get for 3 hours. We moved. 22 older children can be astonishingly quiet when they understand their lives depend on it. And these children understood. A 6th grader named Owen Marsh, no relation to me, took up the rear position without being assigned it. A tall, skinny boy with a stutter who had never once volunteered for anything in his life. And he walked backward down that corridor with his eyes on the hallway behind us, and he did not blink. We reached the art room. The art room door was ajar. I did not look inside. Amber looked inside. Amber's face when she came away from the doorway told me that Ms. Vance, the art teacher, was in there, and that Ms. Vance was not going to be joining us, and that the children should not look. Amber positioned herself in the doorway so that her body blocked the view as the line passed. In the teacher's lounge, the coffee maker was still on. The red light glowed at the base of it with the stubborn cheer of a small machine that did not know its owners were dead. Marcy Dell, passing it, reached out and switched it off, and I understood the gesture as the only act of housekeeping left available to her. And I loved her for it. The back stairs were clear. We came down into the kitchen, and the kitchen was wrong in a specific way. The walk-in freezer door was open, and the walk-in freezer door was never open, because I had installed the self-closing hinge myself in 2019 after a health inspection. Someone had wedged it. From inside the walk-in came no sound at all, which is the worst sound a walk-in can make, because a walk-in has a compressor that runs constantly, and the compressor was off. I moved past the walk-in without looking. Amber did not. Amber looked, and her hand went to her mouth, and she made a sound that was not quite a word. And Briggs caught her elbow and steadied her, and we kept moving. The loading dock door was a heavy steel roll-up with a chain mechanism, and I had the key to the padlock on my ring. And I had never been so grateful for a simple brass key in my life. I unlocked it. Briggs and Owen rolled it up together. Slow, slow, slow. Because a roll-up door is a trumpet if you let it be, and we needed a whisper. Outside, the October field behind the school was empty and yellow and beautiful. And across it, 200 yards away, stood the equipment shed. We ran. We did not all make it. I'm going to say that clearly, because I spent the first week after everything writing it in euphemisms in my head. And the euphemisms were a disrespect to the child I lost on that field. And I will not do that disrespect here. Her name was Katie Voss. She was a 5th grader, small for her age, asthmatic, with an inhaler in her backpack that she had left in her classroom during the lockdown, because the drills said leave your things. She made it 120 yards across the field before her lungs closed, and she went down in the yellow grass. And Mr. Briggs, to his everlasting credit, turned around and went back for her. He scooped her up. He ran with her. He was 44 years old and not a running man, and he ran with that child in his arms like he had been training for it his whole life. They came out of the tree line on the north side of the field. 3 of them. They had been our neighbors that morning. One of them was wearing a mail carrier's uniform. Briggs saw them. Briggs did the arithmetic. Briggs angled south toward the shed, and he did not slow down. And for a moment, I thought he was going to make it. He did not make it. What I will say is that Katie Voss was already gone before they reached him. Her small body loose in his arms in the way that tells you the lungs have finished their argument, and that Mr. Briggs understood this in his last 15 yards and did not put her down, and that he went into the tree line, still holding her, and that I did not see what happened after that because Amber Pritchard put her hand on the back of my neck and turned my face toward the shed and said, "Elena, you cannot watch this. The children are watching you watch this. Look at the shed. Look at the shed. Look at the shed." I looked at the shed. We reached the door. Marcy had the key. Marcy had the key to everything. 26 of us went through the door, and Marcy closed it, and Owen Marsh slid the interior bolt, and the shed became our room. The shed was concrete floored, 40 by 60, with a corrugated steel roof and 2 small high windows and a diesel generator and the riding mower and the line painting machine and shelves of fertilizer and rock salt and, against the back wall, the old yellow school bus that had been decommissioned in 2018, and that Marcy, in her capacity as keeper of all keys, had never surrendered the keys for because, she told me once, you never know. You never know. 22 children, down from 23. 4 adults, down from 7, if you counted Briggs, which I did. Amber, Ms. Patel, Marcy, me. Amber sat down on the concrete floor with her back against the mower, and she put her face in her hands, and she shook. She did not cry. She shook. I let her. Ms. Patel gathered the children into the space between the bus and the wall and began, in a low, steady voice, to lead them in a counting game, which was the only thing any of us could think of to give them that was not silence. Marcy began to inventory the shed, opening cabinets, counting cans of fuel, murmuring into her red binder. I went to the high window on the east side, and I looked back at the school. The school was quiet. From the outside, at that distance, it looked like any Tuesday. The flag was still up. The buses were still in the bus loop. The front doors, which I could not see from this angle, were doing whatever they were doing. And the cafeteria, which I also could not see, was doing whatever it was doing. And somewhere beneath all of it, 119 children were in a room with a boy on a crate. And the room held 120, and I was not in it. I had chosen not to be in it. I pressed my forehead against the cool glass, and I let myself understand that for exactly 10 seconds. And then I turned around, and I went to help Marcy count the fuel. The first night in the shed was the longest night of my life, and I have had long nights. We ran the generator for 1 hour at dusk to charge the 3 cell phones we had between us and to run the small space heater, which I did not trust, but which Ms. Patel insisted on for the smallest child we had, a 6th grader named Priya, who had come down with a fever on the field and whose teeth had not stopped clicking since we crossed the threshold. At 7 p.m. we cut the generator because the sound was a dinner bell, and we could not afford dinner guests. And after that, the shed was lit by the blue light of Marcy's phone, which she had set face down on the floor in the center of the children. There was no signal. There had been no signal since approximately 11 that morning, which Marcy, who listened to talk radio in her car, identified as the point at which the regional cell towers had either been overwhelmed or been cut. Her binder contained the emergency contact list for every family of every child in the building, and she had, at some point in the kitchen, tucked a printed copy of the staff contact list inside the front cover as well. And she sat cross-legged against the wheel of the bus with the binder open on her lap. And she read the names silently to herself, as though the reading were a form of roll call she could not yet stop performing. Amber came and sat next to me near the east window. She had stopped shaking. She had a small smear of dried blood on her cheek that was not hers and that I did not have the heart to tell her about. She said quietly, "Elena, the room holds 120. I said, "Yes." She said, "It closed at 119, not 120. One under." I said, "Yes." She said, "The last one was Lila. Lila's here." I said, "Yes." She said, "So the boy left a space." I had not wanted to think about this yet. I had been holding it at arm's length for 7 hours. Amber, who was a better teacher than I had ever given her credit for, had walked to the question directly and set it down between us. I said, "I don't know what that means." She said, "I think you do." I did not answer. After a while, she put her hand on my wrist, not in comfort, in witness. And she said, "Whatever it is It is not one of the children. I will not let it be one of the children. And I looked at her in the blue light, and I understood that Amber Pritchard had, at some point in the field or in the stairwell or in the art room doorway, decided to survive this with specific rules, and that those rules were not my rules, and that at some point in the coming days we were going to find out where her rules and my rules diverged, and that it was going to cost something. At 3 a.m., the knock came. It was a soft knock, low on the shed door, at the height a child's fist would be. 3 taps, a pause, 3 more. Owen Marsh was nearest. He looked at me. The children, who had finally been sleeping, were already sitting up. Priya, with her fever, was staring at the door with her mouth open. Ms. Patel had her hand over the mouth of a 7th grader who had started to cry. The knock came a 3rd time. A voice on the other side, a child's voice, said, "Miss Elena, it's Jacob. I got out. I got scared and I got out. Please let me in." Jacob, 5 years old, juice box, small sticky hand. I went to the door. Amber caught my arm. Her grip was bruised tight. She shook her head once, slow. She mouthed the word, "No." From behind the door, the voice said, "Miss Elena, please, it's cold." I put my hand flat against the steel of the door, and I did not open it. The voice said, "Miss Elena, the room holds 120. There is still space for you." I did not open the door. I stood with my palm against the cold steel, and I listened to the voice on the other side speak in Jacob's register for another 4 minutes, and then speak in Mr. Briggs's register for 2 minutes, and then speak in my dead husband's register for 11 seconds, which was when I took my hand off the door and walked to the back of the shed and vomited into a bucket of rock salt. When I came back, Amber had not moved. The voice was gone. Owen Marsh was standing at the door with a length of rebar he had pulled from a shelf, and his face was the face of a boy who had become a man in the last 6 hours and was not going to get to go back. We did not speak for a long time. At dawn, Marcy opened the small east window a crack, and we listened to the field. No birds. That was the first thing. The second thing was that the school, across the grass, had a soft yellow light in the ground floor windows that had not been there the night before. Not the harsh fluorescent of the hallways. A warmer light. A kitchen light. A light that said, "Come in. We kept dinner warm for you." Marcy closed the window. At 7 a.m. we had a meeting. All 4 adults, plus Owen, because Owen had earned a chair. The children were eating granola bars from Marcy's binder bag and a sleeve of saltines Miss Patel had been carrying, for reasons related to her own nausea, and did not explain. Amber said, "We cannot stay here." Marcy said, "The bus has 3/4 of a tank. I drove it 2 weeks ago for a field trip to the pumpkin patch. It runs. It is loud, but it runs." Miss Patel said, "Where do we go?" Amber said, "North. The evacuation corridor on the radio yesterday was north, toward Maryville. If we can get to the interstate, we can get to a checkpoint." Marcy said, "The bus will not make it to the interstate without being heard." I said, "The bus does not need to make it to the interstate. The bus needs to make it to the Ackerman farm, which is 4 miles up the county road. And Mr. Ackerman has a tanker of diesel and 2 horse trailers and a son in the National Guard. And if he is still there, we can caravan." They looked at me. Amber said, "How do you know that?" I said, "Because Mr. Ackerman's granddaughter is in the basement." The silence after that was a different kind of silence. I said, "Her name is Hattie Ackerman. She is in 2nd grade. She went down with the 2nd batch. If Mr. Ackerman is alive, he will help us, because he will believe me when I tell him where she is, and because he will want to come back for her." Amber said, "Elena, she is not coming back." I said. I did not say she was. We loaded the bus at 7:42 a.m. 22 children in the seats, 4 adults standing in the aisle. Marcy in the driver's seat because Marcy had driven that bus for the pumpkin patch, and because Marcy, it turned out, had a commercial license from a previous life none of us had known about. I stood behind her with my hand on the rail. Amber sat with Priya across her lap, the child's fever now high enough to see in the cheeks. Ms. Patel walked the aisle, murmuring to children by name. A liturgy of attention I have never seen a better version of before or since. Owen rolled up the shed door. The field was empty. The school across it was quiet. The warm yellow light in the ground floor windows was still on in full daylight, which is not a thing lights do. Marcy turned the key. The bus coughed, caught, and rumbled. Every head in the shed flinched at the sound. I looked at the school one more time. The warm yellow light flickered twice in a pattern. Long, short, long, short. Come back, come back. I said, drive. Marcy drove. The county road out of Coldwater runs through 2 miles of soybean fields and then bends hard east around a creek before climbing to the Ackerman place. And Marcy took that road at 35 miles an hour in a 1996 Bluebird school bus with 26 living souls in it and a fuel gauge I watched like a second pulse. We passed the Dell farm, which was Marcy's cousin's place, and Marcy did not slow down and did not turn her head. We passed the Coldwater Baptist Church, whose parking lot held 12 cars and no people, and whose front doors were standing open in a way that front doors of churches should never stand. We passed the turnoff to the elementary school from the other direction, and from that angle, I could see the back of the building and the basement windows, which had been painted over in black enamel in 2004 as part of the welding project, were no longer painted black. They were clear. And behind the clear glass, in the basement that should have been dark, something moved in the warm yellow light. And I did not look long enough to count how many. We reached the Ackerman place at 8:11 a.m. The gate was closed. The house was intact. Mr. Ackerman, who was 71 years old and built like a length of fence post, was standing on his front porch with a deer rifle across his forearms and his wife Doreen behind him in the doorway with a shotgun. When he saw the bus, he did not lower the rifle, but he did not raise it either. He waited. Marcy stopped the bus at the gate. I got off alone. I walked up the gravel drive with my hands visible and my keys in my front pocket and my name already on my lips. Mr. Ackerman said, "Elena Marsh." I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "My Hattie." I said, "She is in the basement of the school. She is alive. I do not know for how long. I do not know what that means. I came here because you are the only person within 10 miles who has fuel and trailers and a son who can use a radio. And because I owe you the truth about where your granddaughter is, which is more than I can do for the other 118. Mr. Ackerman looked at me a long time. Doreen came down off the porch and walked past him and past me and up to the bus, and looked in the open door at the children inside. And she counted them, the way a grandmother counts. And then she turned around and walked back to her husband, and she said, "Cal, open the gate." He opened the gate. We spent 6 hours at the Ackerman place. Mr. Ackerman's son, Deputy Ackerman of the Nottoway County Sheriff's Department, was not there, but his radio was. And Mr. Ackerman raised a guard unit at a staging area outside Maryville by 9:30. And by noon, a convoy of 2 Humvees and a 5-ton truck had come down the county road and formed up in his driveway. A medic looked at Priya and started a line in her arm. A sergeant named Whitfield looked at my face, and at Amber's face, and at Marcy's binder. and asked the kind of questions that are not really questions. And I answered them. And I told him about the basement. And I told him about the warm yellow light. And I told him about the room that held 120. Sergeant Whitfield did not tell me I was crazy. Sergeant Whitfield wrote it down. He said, "We are not going to the school today." I said, "I know." He said, "We may not go to the school at all." I said, "I know." He said, "Ma'am, is there anyone inside who you believe is still in the way that matters? A child?" I said, "Sergeant, I do not know anymore what the way that matters is." He nodded. He wrote that down too. We evacuated north in the 5-ton truck at 2:17 p.m. The children loaded in 2 rows on the bench seats with Amber and Ms. Patel between them. Marcy up front with the driver because Marcy had the binder, and the binder had become, somewhere between the shed and the Ackerman porch, the official record of the Coldwater Elementary incident. Mr. Ackerman and Doreen followed in their truck with a horse trailer, and 2 guard Humvees bracketed the convoy. I sat on the tailgate with my feet hanging out the back and my keys still in my front pocket. And I watched the county road unspool away from us. And when we came around the creek bend and the school came into view across the fields one last time, I saw the yellow light in the basement windows. And the light, at that distance, did the long, short pattern again, slow and patient. And I understood that it was not trying to summon me anymore. It was marking me, was reminding me that it knew my name. I turned my back to it. I did not turn around again. We reached the Maryville rally point at 4:40 p.m. They processed us in a high school gym that smelled like every gym I have ever mopped. They separated the children from the adults for medical clearance, and then, thank God, let us find each other again within the hour. Priya's fever broke on a cot under fluorescent lights. Owen Marsh called his mother from a Red Cross phone and found out she was alive in Des Moines. Amber Pritchard sat on the bleachers and finally cried. And I sat next to her and did not touch her because some grief is a fence and you respect the fence. Marcy Dell handed her binder to a woman in a FEMA vest and did not let go of it until the woman promised, in writing, to copy every page and return the original. The woman promised. Marcy let go. Marcy went to find coffee. I was debriefed 3 times in 4 days by 3 different uniforms. I told the story the same way each time. I did not embroider. I did not soften. I named the adults who had died, and I named the 2 children we had lost between the stairwell and the shed. Katie Voss and a 1st grader named Miles Hanrahan, whose absence from the count I had registered in the stairwell and had not been able to speak aloud until the 3rd debrief. Miles had been in the kindergarten wing. Miles had gone down the stairs in the 2nd batch. Miles had not, according to my count at the basement door, reached the basement. Miles had gone somewhere in the stairwell. I did not know where. I told them I did not know where, and they wrote that down. On the 4th day, a woman in a gray suit who did not give her name sat across from me at a folding table and asked me about the basement. Not about the outbreak, about the basement, about the welded door, about the boy named Thomas, about the room that held 120. She had a folder. The folder had photographs in it. The photographs were of Coldwater Elementary, of the west stairwell, of the basement door, taken in 2004 and 2011 and 2019, by people I'd never heard of in capacities I was not told. I answered her questions. I answered them fully. When she closed the folder, she said, "Ms. Marsh, we have known about the basement for some time. We did not know it would open during an outbreak. We did not know it would be generous." I said, "Is that what you call it?" She said, "We call it contained. You have made it less contained by leaving. You understand that?" I said, "I understand that 119 children are in that room, and that a woman from the federal government is telling me they are contained, and that I'm going to spend the rest of my life deciding what to do with that sentence. She said, "That is accurate." She left. I never saw her again. 8 months later, I was the head custodian at Nodaway North Elementary in Maryville, Missouri. And I was also, in ways that did not appear on my paycheck, something else. The Coldwater children who had come out with me, the 21 who had survived the field and the bus and the long processing, had been distributed across 3 school districts in northwest Missouri. And without anyone ever drawing up paperwork for it, their parents had quietly agreed that I was to be informed of their well-being on a regular schedule. Not their teachers, not their counselors, me. I got a text message every Sunday evening from 21 different phone numbers, a single line each, sometimes a photograph. Owen is playing basketball. Priya started clarinet. Lila's cast came off in November. She asked if you wanted to sign the plaster before we threw it out. We kept it for you. I signed the plaster. I still have it. Amber Pritchard moved to Lincoln, Nebraska, and took a job teaching 4th grade at a charter school. And she and I spoke on the phone on the first Sunday of every month for 45 minutes. And we did not, ever, discuss the boy on the crate, or the voice at the shed door, or the warm yellow light. We discussed her students. We discussed my knees. We discussed Marcy Dell, who had retired to her sister's place in Branson and had, against all expectation, taken up oil painting. Ms. Patel went back to India. I did not blame her. Mr. Ackerman and Doreen still lived on the farm, and I drove down to see them once a month, and we sat on their porch and did not discuss Hattie. And Mr. Ackerman had taken to leaving a plate on the kitchen table at dinner that was not for anyone at the table. And Doreen did not ask him to stop. And I did not ask him to stop either. The school in Coldwater was not reopened. The guard had returned 3 times in the first month, each time with more equipment and fewer press releases. And on the 3rd visit, they had sealed the building with a kind of poured foam around every door and window that set into a gray, rubbery crust. And they had posted a fence around the property at a 100-yard radius. And they had left. The fence had signs on it. The sign said federal property, no trespassing, and gave a phone number. I had called the phone number once. A woman had answered and said, "Ms. Marsh, we were wondering when you would call. Is something wrong?" I had said no. I had said I was checking that the number worked. She had said, "It works, Ms. Marsh. It will always work." I had hung up. I had not been back to Coldwater. I drove past it once on a county road 2 miles east, on my way to the Ackerman place in March. The school was visible across the fields. The basement windows had been covered from outside by the gray foam, but in the afternoon sun, the foam had a seam, low on the east side, and the seam glowed faintly, a warm yellow in the cold spring light. And I pulled the car over onto the shoulder, and I sat with my hands on the wheel, and I watched the seam for a long time. It did not signal me. It did not pattern. It simply glowed, patient, as if it had all the time there was and no need to perform. I understood, sitting in the car on the shoulder of that road, that the thing in the basement had not wanted 120 children. It had wanted 119 children and 1 adult woman who could count. It had been willing to take the children as payment, but the real transaction had been the counting. I had counted my whole life. I had counted bottles and buckets and children on a fire drill and mop strokes on a hallway floor. I had counted, in that stairwell, to 119, and I had stopped. And the stopping had been the thing the basement had wanted from me, because stopping at a number is a form of agreement. I drove on. I did not tell anyone about the glow under the foam, not Amber, not Marcy, not Sergeant Whitfield, who had given me his card and told me I could call him day or night. I did not call him day or night. I held the information the way I'd once held the feeling of the building exhaling at 6:12 a.m. On a Tuesday in October, I filed it. I did not spend it. What I did instead was build a life. I will tell you what that life looks like, because I promised at the beginning of this that I would not soften anything. And a soft ending would be its own kind of lie. My life at Nodaway North Elementary looked like this. I arrived at 5:30 a.m. each morning, and I walked the building before the teachers came in. I checked every door. I checked every window. I put my hand flat on the floor outside the boiler room, and I waited to see if the floor had anything to tell me. And when it did not, I went and made coffee. I learned the name of every child in the building within the first 6 weeks. And I learned which classrooms had radiators that knocked and which lockers required a kick. And I learned the back stairwells and the loading dock and the route from the kindergarten wing to any exterior door. And I drew a map of this in my head, and I updated it every Friday. I was preparing. I will not pretend I was not preparing. The principal of Nodaway North was a woman named Delia Burke, who had been briefed, in some amount I was not given access to, about what had happened in Coldwater. She treated me with a careful, unshowy respect that I understood to be the respect of a woman who had read a file and decided to trust the person in front of her, despite the file, rather than because of it. In April, she called me into her office and she said, "Elena, the district is rewriting the emergency procedures for all 12 buildings. They want a custodian on the committee." I said, "Me." She said, "You." I joined the committee. I did not tell them about the basement. I told them about doors. I told them about sight lines and hinge directions, and which way a crash bar should swing when a 10-year-old hits it at full run. I told them about Mr. Keene and his propped music room door, not by name, just by type. And the committee listened, because the committee had also read files. The new procedures included a line, at my insistence, that read, "In the event of shelter in place, no adult shall separate children into groups based on a count given by any unidentified party. All children in the building are to be sheltered together or not at all." The line was accepted. The line was adopted district-wide. The line is, as far as I know, still in the manual. It is the only thing I will ever publish about what happened in Coldwater. On Sundays, I cooked a large meal, and I ate it alone at my kitchen table, and I wrote, in a spiral notebook, the names of the 119 children in the basement. I wrote them in the order I remembered them going down the stairs. I got to 94 reliably. The remaining 25 came back to me slowly over the first year, 1 or 2 a month, summoned by a smell or a sound or a photograph in the newspaper. And I added them when they arrived. And by the 2nd October after the outbreak, I had all 119 names on the list. I wrote Hattie Ackerman first, always, as a courtesy to her grandfather, who I knew was writing her name at his own table on the same night. I did not write Jacob's name on the list. Jacob was on the list of children in the basement. Jacob was also the voice at the shed door. Jacob was, as far as I was capable of understanding, both. I wrote Jacob on a separate page, by himself, and I did not turn that page often. In the second autumn, after Coldwater, a letter arrived at Nodaway North, addressed to me in a child's handwriting. No return address. Postmarked from a town in southern Missouri I had never been to. Delia Burke brought it to my office herself and set it on my desk and did not leave. She said, "Elena, I'm going to stand here while you open this, and if you want me to take it from you, I will." I opened it. Inside was a single sheet of lined notebook paper, and on the paper, in pencil, in the careful block letters of a child who had been taught to write correctly and was still proud of it, were 4 lines. Miss Elena, the room is warm, the boy is kind. We do not get hungry. Please do not come. It was signed, in the same pencil, Hattie. I sat with the letter on my desk for a long time. Delia stood across from me with her hands folded in front of her and did not speak. After perhaps 10 minutes, she said, "Do you believe it is from her?" I said, "I believe it is from someone who knows her handwriting." She said, "Those are not the same thing." I said, "No, ma'am, they are not." I took the letter home. I did not show it to Mr. Ackerman. I thought about this choice for several weeks, and I'm still, years later, not certain I made the right one. But I made it. Mr. Ackerman was 73 and frail, and had been sleeping poorly, and Doreen had told me on the porch in July that she was not sure his heart could hold another piece of information about Hattie, whether the information was good or bad, because his heart was no longer a heart that distinguished between those categories. I filed the letter in a shoebox under my bed with the cast plaster Lila had sent me and the copy of Marcy's binder that Marcy had insisted I accept as a gift at her retirement party. I kept an eye on the mail for another letter. None came. In the 3rd year, I started receiving dinner invitations. This was not a thing that had previously happened to me. I was a 50-year-old widowed custodian in a small Missouri town. And in my previous life, I had been invisible in the specific way that women who clean buildings are invisible. And I had made peace with it decades ago. But after Coldwater, people who had read the files or heard the rumors or simply seen my name in the district manual began to invite me, carefully, to Sunday dinners and to birthday parties, and to, in one case, a baptism I went to some. I declined others. I learned the difference eventually between people who wanted my company and people who wanted proximity to whatever they thought I had survived. And I learned to tell them apart within about 4 minutes of meeting them. I made, in this way, 3 real friends. Their names were Delia Burke, a retired sheriff's deputy named Carl Voss, no relation to Katie, who had lost his own grandson in a school shooting in another state 8 years earlier, and who understood, without me ever describing it, the specific posture of a person who had made a count and stopped. And a woman named Rita Moreno, who ran the Maryville Public Library and who checked out books to me by the armload, and never once asked me what I was reading them for. I was reading them because I was looking for anything in folklore or history or theology or geology that described a room that holds 120. I did not find it. I kept looking. Rita knew I was looking. Rita did not ask. Rita was the best friend I had ever had, and I did not deserve her. And I told her so once, and she said, "Elena, nobody deserves their friends. That is what friends are." And she handed me a book about Appalachian cave systems and went back to the returns desk. On the 5th anniversary of the outbreak, I drove to Coldwater. I had not planned to. I had woken up at 4:30 that morning in my small house in Maryville with the specific clarity of a person who has been given an instruction in a dream and no longer remembers the dream. And I had put on my coat, and I had gotten in the car. The drive was 90 minutes. I took the county road that skirted the school at a distance, and then at the last turnoff, I did not skirt. I turned in. The fence was still there. The signs were still there. The phone number on the signs had been updated twice, on small patches riveted over the original. I parked outside the fence at the main gate, and I sat in the car, and I watched the school. The foam was gone. Someone, at some point in the preceding year, had removed the gray rubbery crust from the windows and doors, and they had not replaced it. The building looked, from the gate, like a school on a Saturday morning. Empty, ordinary. The grass had been cut recently. That was the part that broke my composure. Someone was cutting the grass. I got out of the car. I walked up to the fence. I did not climb it. I was 52 years old, and I had no interest in climbing fences. And also, I understood that if I climbed the fence, I would go down to the basement. And if I went down to the basement, I would count. And I had not counted in 5 years, and I did not intend to start. I stood at the fence and I spoke aloud. For the first time since the stairwell, the names of the 119. It took me 41 minutes. I said them in the order I remembered them going down. Kindergartners first. I said Hattie Ackerman first because I had promised her grandfather, silently, that I always would. I said Jacob on his own page at the end. And when I said his name, the warm yellow light came on in the ground floor cafeteria windows, soft and steady. And it did not pattern this time. It held. I said, I am not coming in. The light held. I said, I am not coming in today, and I am not coming in tomorrow, and I am not coming in ever. And I'm telling you this not because I think I can hurt you by telling you, but because I'm a woman who says what she is doing before she does it. That is the only thing I brought out of that building that was mine before I went in. I am taking it back to Maryville with me. The light held for another moment, and then it went out, not dramatically, the way a person turns off a kitchen light when they have finished the dishes and are going to bed. I walked back to the car. I drove to Maryville. I got to Notaway North at 8:15, 15 minutes late for my shift for the first time in 5 years. And Delia Burke was standing in the front vestibule with a cup of coffee for me and did not say anything about the time. I took the coffee. I went to my closet. I started my day. That night, at my kitchen table, I opened the spiral notebook with a list of names. And I did something I had not done before. I wrote, at the bottom of the last page, my own name, Elena Marsh. I was not adding myself to the list of the taken. I was adding myself to the list of the accounted for. I was writing myself down as a person who had been in that building and had come out on and was, on this specific Tuesday evening in October, still here, still counting, still choosing the number I stopped at. I closed the notebook. I put it in the shoebox under the bed with the cast and the binder and the letter. I turned off the light. I am 61 years old now. I still work at Notaway North, though Delia retired last spring, and the new principal does not know my file. I have not been back to the fence. The children from the shed are adults. Owen Marsh teaches history in St. Joseph. Priya is a pediatric nurse in Omaha. Lila Corbin got married in June and invited me, and I went, and I danced badly, and her mother held my hand through the father-daughter song because Lila had asked her to. I still write the names on Sunday nights. I am slower now. My handwriting has changed. The list has not. What I understand at 61 that I did not understand at 47 is that I was never the woman who saved 22 children. I was the woman who chose which ones to save. And the choosing was the injury. And the injury is the thing I live inside, not the thing I carry. I am not forgiven. I did not ask to be. I counted. I stopped at a number. I said the number out loud. That is the whole confession. The rest is just the years.